So today we're going to discuss about very, very important topic, how Islam arrived in New Zealand, how the Muslim community is interacting, and how we see them that in the future in New Zealand. So Mr. Ashraf, please tell us a little bit more about it all started. New Zealand is way out there, how Muslims reached in New Zealand.
Well, thank you for that. Actually, New Zealand history is pretty much, it aligns with the original the European people when they came here. And it's funny, the Muslim people, we can trace them back to around 1769. That's a long time ago, 250 years ago. Mm-hmm. So that's when people were sort of exploring around here and seeing what's happening. And then, of course, other people came from Europe. And but really more formally in terms of census data that we have, in New Zealand, where we do every 5 years, we count number of people, who they are and all that, in terms of their religion and all that. And I found that in the first time when we formally, we did the census of religious groups, it is found in 1874. That's when there were about 15 Chinese gold miners here. You wouldn't believe it. So people from China, and particularly from the north of China, they were the original Muslim people who came, and they were the gold miners, and particularly in the South Island, and their remnants, if you like, they're still there, of the Chinese gold miners. And so among them were these 15 Muslims who declared themselves they were Muslim at the time. So really, it goes back to when the colonizers came to New Zealand and made this place their home. So ever since, obviously, over time, the number of people have increased. And also we can notice earlier, after the World War I, and then of course World War II, there were people who came from Europe, particularly from Yugoslavia and all that area. I know personally some people who were Yugoslav. There were people who were Albanian, and of course there were some Turkish people too, who came after World War I. But so there was not too many of them. And actually, a number of them then subsequently they moved to Australia because that's where they had larger communities up there. For example, as you know, in Australia, there's this large community of Muslims from Turkey and Albania, and of course, then after the World War, then they had a lot of Lebanese came there. So a lot of these people, because they were a little bit isolated here, so many of them, they remigrated to Australia to join the other friends and relatives. So that's the kind of, history has been there a long time, 250 years. And more documented history sort of goes back to, 200 years.
Yeah, it's truly amazing. I was traveling in Kobe in Japan. And I was walking around area. It was considered the touristy area, very old historical buildings. And that's where one mosque was there, and called Kobe Mosque. And when I started reading about it, it was built in the 18th century time. I mean, it was during the time they had the shogun, or they had this very, very crucial timing where no foreigners were allowed. And then here is this mosque built by Muslims. And I was just wondering where these Muslims come from. It's truly amazing to reading about it. I mean, I think it's amazing, amazing building. And the building actually survived the Second World War timing, survived the earthquake, all these challenges and different timing. And then somehow building was still there. Mosque is still operating today. It's just a beautiful thing to see. Now, one of the fascinating things I saw in that mosque, I met the imam who was actually Japanese. Yeah. And he can speak Arabic very well. And he converted to Islam. And it was just a beautiful thing to see how Islamic culture actually this sort of sort of traveling between different cultures. Now, is there such thing in New Zealand? Is the same thing happening?
Well, no, because we had a small number of people, as I said, who came in the boats, and and they were not as significant communities there. As I said, there were some people from Turkish and Yugoslav background, and I know personally I met some of them, but they then either some of them died and others moved to Australia. So very few of those. The significant community, of course, is then over the last 50 years, and really more like Indian background people. So we had a lot of these people who came actually almost 100 years ago, who were Punjabis and from Indian subcontinent, and of course the Gujaratis, and among them were also Muslim communities. So we know that, and there is a history actually by the Indian community. They have written some books, and that includes some of those early Muslims who came 120 years ago, for example, 100 years ago. And again, I met some of those people who were here when I arrived in this country. They were from old days too. So, but more significant, really, major migration of Muslim community has happened in more recent time, or last 50 years, say, from the time that I arrived here. Then there was more open immigration. Of course, in the old days, there was a bit difficult, for various reasons. But then people start coming in the 60s and 70s, 1960s and 70s, when, there was more sort of students came in to study, people who had medical degrees or scientists, and, those people came in a bit more. So that's more recent, what we call 50 years history. And but now, alhamdulillah, there's a major population, over 61,000. The last census showed 2 years ago, over 61,000 Muslim here, from all backgrounds, by the way. It's a really multicultural, and I think we have among ourselves about 50 different ethnicities, including, by the way, the Maori people. Number of Maori people, the local, we call them Tangata Whenua, they have become Muslim now, either directly or through intermarriage or something. And so there are hundreds of them as well. And then, of course, there are some people from the small island background who are married to some Muslim members, and they become Muslims too. So it's quite, a multicultural society among Muslims as well.
Oh, this is truly amazing. Now, I was also reading about there are 2 Islamic schools also in New Zealand.
Well, yes, they are. Of course, now, as you can imagine, because the Muslim population increased, particularly in Auckland, that's where, 40% of our population lives. And most of the immigrants who arrived in New Zealand usually land in Auckland and stay, 50% of them stay in Auckland. So you can imagine, among the wider ethnic community, including Muslim community, about 80% of those people stay in Auckland. Okay, so hence there was a need for it, and some groups have got together and set up these schools. They were started as private schools, and now they're kind of what do we call partially funded by the government, and they become more integrated schools, in the system. So there are schools, and of course now we have a number of childcare centers which have been set up by the communities themselves, including a couple of them by the Turkish community, childcare centers. And there are plans for setting up some more schools over time as the need grows. And particularly childcare centers now, I believe, in a number of cities have been set up more formally, because we do in New Zealand put a lot of effort into early childhood education from early days, and particularly government funds 3 and 4-year-olds before they go to school. They give them 20% free, education in childcare centers. What do we call it? 50% of the fees are paid by the government. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and definitely we can see this transition, the Muslim communities and Western communities, and we do see this is like in country like Canada, we see in the US, the UK, Norway, New Zealand,
Yeah.
Australia. We can see this transition, beautiful transition going
Yeah.
on
And
between
the beauty
cultures.
of it is, of course, we get all really multi-ethnic, group,
Mhm.
and that particularly in the Muslim community, that's where you see it. You don't see so much in the other religious communities, but among the Muslim community, there, you see Africans, you see Middle Eastern, Indians, Chinese, all sorts of people are there. When you go to a mosque on a Friday prayer, you'll see that, or even a childcare center. I visit. I'm associated with one of the Turkish community childcare center, and I see that beautiful diversity there among staff and it was among the students. So that's really great to see that.
Yeah, it's truly amazing. And yeah, I mean, definitely if you walk into any Islamic center or any mosque, you will see
Yeah,
different people from different ethnic backgrounds
yeah,
just together, praying together, just having discussion. So I think
yeah,
it's just truly,
yeah.
truly beautiful.
At least one organization, Muslim organization, first established, over 50 years ago. And in Auckland, there was a original mosque. It was a house which is converted into a mosque. And when more, population grew, then we established a number of Muslim organizations. So there was a Muslim organization in Auckland and Wellington, and then a number of them were established in other smaller cities. And a particularly important part was that then when I arrived around that time, some of us got together and we established the national body, which we called New Zealand Federation of Islamic Associations. And now formally it's called Federation of Islamic Associations of New Zealand, in a brief, FIANZ. And that was established in late 70s, 79, actually 1978, 79, to be correct. And then that has become an umbrella body, which covers all the Muslim organizations and become a very well-known organization in the government circles, in the wider community. And that organization, FIANZ, still works very well, in coordinating activities and liaising with the government and other religious organizations. And that's done a fantastic job. And of course, as I said, I was one of the pioneers of that. And that is still carrying on. And that's really good.
Wow, what a history, what a timing, huh? How this whole thing started, how people actually traveled from one country to other country, arrived in New Zealand, and then somehow actually built these beautiful things. And now their
Yes.
families are growing together, developing together between different ethnic
And
groups.
now we got so many mosques and Islamic centers. I think in Auckland alone, there are more than 20 of them. And almost every city of, let's say, of population over 20,000 will have a mosque or more. And then, of course, and we got a really proper, well constructed mosque, for example, like Christchurch. That was the first mosque properly built. Of course, we got some funding from the Saudis at the time, but that was the mosque we used to call it the furthest away from Mecca in the whole world, because it's in the South Island and there's no further from there than the Antarctic. So that was great, and that was unfortunately that's where the that unfortunate incident, terrorist attack happened in one of those mosques, and that was Al Noor Mosque in Christchurch. And it's fantastic.
Yeah, that was pretty sad. And I think that was the first incident where there was a wake up call from New Zealand. The leadership in New Zealand, they took it like the first priority, and they looked after the community very well. Tell us a little more about during that time. Do you remember just a little bit?
Well, it was as you said, it was the first time it happened in New Zealand. something like that we used to hear about other side of the world. But it was terrible, terrible thing happened. And but I'm really delighted the way the Prime Minister down, everybody took very serious note of this, and we had to do a lot of measures to make sure that it doesn't happen again. Uh, and then, of course, that terrorist was found and has been convicted, and he came from, unfortunately, from Australia. And but what it has done is got the Muslim community and the wider community and the government together, and we have now established a group which liaise. We had what we call a royal commission established to find out what has happened, and what's the way forward. So out of that, so we got a national level committee established to which will work together close to the government and provide leadership in terms of what should be done in the future, so such incidences don't happen again. So that was a terrible time, and unfortunately 51 people died.
This kind of incidents will teach us a lot about what is going on in Western communities. And
Yeah.
as we see, there's a lot of misinformed people of the
Yeah.
Islamic religion. And somehow different communities, I mean, and a lot of people simply don't understand Islam is actually spread in many different cultures, in many different countries, and they all have their own cultures tagged with their religion. And sometimes it's very hard for non-Muslims to tell what's the difference between the culture and the religion. And somehow some societies will put them together. And a lot of people, outside people, they're not really aware of this whole thing. Is there some way the Muslim community is helping and supporting and trying to educate?
As I said, I mean, these are kind of things which are happening. And apart from that, we have particularly after in 9/11, there was a group established at the regional level, which in Southeast Asia and Pacific countries, the governments here in Australia, Indonesia, New Zealand, and the other countries got together and started this interfaith dialogue. So there were a number of regional meetings, and I participated in the part of the New Zealand delegation to a meeting in Indonesia. And then we established, I did one here in New Zealand as well, 20 years ago. And the idea was that we should promote more interfaith dialogue so we can get better understanding of each other. And you'll be pleased to know that we have those kind of interfaith dialogue now right throughout the country. In all cities, almost everywhere can think of. Like I mentioned earlier, that I'm a part of the Council of Christians and Muslims in Auckland. And in fact, I'm one of the patrons when the thing was established. And the whole idea is let's discuss and talk about each other, talk about religious values, talk about, who we are, and, so we can create peace and harmony. And alhamdulillah, that's going on every city nowadays. And most of the organizations, this Islamic Federation I mentioned, FIANS, they also help participate and, conduct some of those interfaith dialogues. And all those interfaith dialogue, about 7, 8 different religious groups, gather together, and I'm part of many of them too myself. And we talk about it, and try to have understanding for each other, and promote peace and harmony. As I said, it's done now locally as well as regionally, and there are many organizations which are part of, particularly Christians, and we have what we call Abrahamic groups, Christian, Muslim, and Jews together as well. And, there are separate meetings for them too. So the number of those things are happening. And largely, as I said, New Zealand has been a fantastic place for, interfaith harmony and valuing each other.
Oh, this sounds fantastic. So this Abrahamic means is all these 3 religions of Abraham, Jews and Christians and Muslims.
Muslims, So we have those meetings too, particularly because if you look at historically, there have been issues among those 3 main religions. So a number of groups now established, actually, we talk about that Abrahamic religious harmony. And that's a fantastic. Yeah. Now, of course, we have other meeting interfaith with the others, the Hindus and Sikhs and, whoever else. But these particular, Abrahamic, groups, they meet together and talk quite regularly.
Yeah, I remember reading about in New York City, they wanted to establish an Islamic center. And if I'm not mistaken, that it was actually a small mosque. And that mosque was actually just a tiny apartment in New York City, where most of the people who were working nearby, they would just go and pray. And it wasn't really a formal Islamic center. It was just somebody's apartment where they would all get together. So after some time, they thought, okay, we want to turn that into Islamic center where we can actually provide more information to other people.
Yeah.
And funny thing is, they actually opened this discussion on radio, NPR, and I was listening to that NPR, and there were people making phone calls from outside of New York, and they were actually making a big objection about this. They were saying, "Oh, how they can." I mean, and that location wasn't very far from the World Trade Center.
Yeah.
So they were all getting very upset. How come Muslims are going to build this Islamic center and blah, blah, blah. But interesting thing is the Jewish community in New York were very happy about this Islamic center. They were they were actually supporting Muslims, and they were saying, no, this is a great thing. And they were supporting Muslims in that way because they said, well, when we arrived in America, we've gone through very tough times. And now this is a situation where they're all aware of the religion and peaceful people.
Jewish community has gone through the same kind of situation. The past is still go through when things happen over in the Middle East. There's sort of a lot of reaction. But interesting, I just thought I'll let you know as well. Apart from those, we also now have if you like, prayer places in all the tertiary education institutions. And that got started again. I helped start that, built a mosque at Massey University. That's where I was there for 25 years. And 25 years ago, almost 24 years ago, I established the first mosque, if you like, in a university campus. And it was great to see the university at the time. They realized, and of course I asked them too, well, look, we get a lot of these Muslim students coming here. We get no place for prayers, and it'll be a good strategy, a marketing strategy, to have a place where Muslims can actually pray when they need to during daytime, when they're at the university, and as a staff, they can do their prayers. And at the time, the university hierarchy understood that,